Hi, I'm Nish, your friendly neighborhood goblin guy, and I am making a massive dark fantasy goblin castle for D&D and Mordheim, and in this video, I'm going to be making the epic castle gate. Welcome to Goblins! If you haven't watched the first video in the series, I recommend checking that out first. I go over the lore and my goals for the project, and I sketch the entire thing out. Going forward in each video, I'm going to take a section of that silhouette, and I'm going to refine it until it is done, and eventually I will have a fully playable castle. Like I said last time, a feature I knew I wanted to include was a gate with a face carved into it where the opening of the gate is a mouth. Now, this idea seems so obvious to me, I thought it must have been done 1,000 times. But as I was looking for references for this, I was surprised at how few examples I could find. I found a handful of examples from real life, but nothing was quite what I was going for. Which is great because it means we're doing something new. To me, gathering references is such an important part of any build. It really sounds like I'm gearing up to do some sort of sponsor segment, but I swear I'm not. I just want to talk about references. I feel like I've seen every illustration of a castle that Google and Pinterest has to offer at this point. As I was conceptualizing the look of this gate, I started collecting images of grotesques and gargoyles and medieval art, because that's the kind of style I'm going for. But when possible, it can be super helpful to get some IRL inspiration, and it just so happened that the Museum of Fine Arts was doing an exhibit on Roman sculptures, so I took a little field trip. This was just so cool. It's awesome to be able to see these beautiful ancient sculptures in person. But one of the coolest parts of the exhibit that I didn't expect is that almost every piece had been restored. Nearly every piece had a section that was the original sculpt, but then many years later was repaired and resculpted by a different artist. In some cases, the sculptures were literally kit-bashed together to create something new. It just really struck me how many parallels there were with my hobby. In repairing sculpts that had been broken, in repurposing sculpts to make something new, in taking another artist's work and doing your own thing with it. It was really cool to see. Also, to just be able to see these beautiful stone relief carvings when that is exactly what I'm trying to emulate in this project was just perfect timing. Once I was thoroughly inspired, I started sketching. My sketching process usually starts with just copying references to get a feel for the style. Then I note the parts of the references that I like the most, and I try to carry those over as I continue to draw. I take those pieces that I like, I combine them, and I iterate until organically the pieces go from being references to being drawn in my own style. I try my best not to plagiarize, but for this section I am mostly referencing medieval and Gothic architecture so as to not accidentally rip off a modern artist. I'd much rather rip off an ancient one. Eventually, I settled on this sketch that I really like. I feel like it's got a good mix of being funny, but also kind of scary. I'm trying to find a balance between medieval art and Brian Froud. I feel like that's my sweet spot. With the sketch done, I was ready to start sculpting. I decided to use Super Sculpey for this. It's a really easy to use, forgiving clay, but it has to be baked in the oven. I decided to sculpt on a piece of parchment paper on the back side of a baking sheet. I figured once baked I could peel it off and I would have a flat backside that I could glue onto a piece of XPS foam. I've never done this before, but I was pretty sure it would work. As I sculpted, I further refined the design, looking at references of grotesques to get the kind of shape language right. I tried to imagine this was stonework to avoid sculpting too many fiddly little details. Stonework tends to be very striking and very smooth. I played around a lot with the shapes, making sure every section felt satisfying and intentional, and then I took isopropyl alcohol to get rid of any surface texture or fingerprints. And finally I put it in the oven to bake, and I definitely didn't almost drop it. I wouldn't do that. I have a making philosophy I like to call sculpt the face first, which I think can apply to a lot of different mediums. When I'm sculpting a miniature, I build the entire foundation first, but when it comes time to sculpt the details, I always begin with the face. This can for sure be intimidating, but sculpting the face first defines the character and can act as a kind of style guide for the rest of the model. I found when I sculpt the face last, the rest of the model ends up kind of generic and uninspired because I haven't found the character yet. When the face has a lot of character and detail and personality, it inspires me to do the same with the rest of the sculpt. This concept can also apply to terrain. Build the focal point of your board first. That could be a clock tower or a mausoleum or a ruined tank, whatever draws the eye the most. Building the focal point first can give you a ton of insights, like how detailed the rest of the board is going to be. It can answer questions like, how old is this? Who built this? Why? Having these questions answered while you work on other sections of the board will give your piece an overall cohesion and voice that I don't think you would have found otherwise. In the case of my castle, the focal point is literally a face, so I'm going to sculpt the face first. This is the front of the castle. It is the first thing you see when you enter. It needs to set the tone for what's to come. It is really tempting to save this section for later when I have a better idea of the style and the materials I'm going to use, but that's exactly why I need to do it first, to set a foundation of style and materials for the rest of the build. My goal for this project was to create a castle that captures the feel of 80s animation, but that's kind of an abstract concept. Seeing the sculpt come together, I don't know if it's going to feel exactly like what I was picturing. Even though this sculpt is maybe a departure of the style I was going for, I feel more confident now in the build than I did before because now I feel like the build has its own voice. I love my weird, whimsical, medieval goblin clown gate, and I am so excited to see where this build goes from here. Once the Sculpey was cured, I glued it to the piece of XPS foam that I cut out in the last episode with some wood glue. And because I'm me, it was at this point I decided I wanted it to have a portcullis, and to glue that in place, I needed to cut this piece of foam directly in half, which would have been a lot easier before I glued this piece of Sculpey to it, but I am who I am. I made the portcullis out of a dollar store tennis racket. It was pretty much good to go, but it was a bit too round, so I sanded the entire front face to make it look a bit more like metal, and I sharpened the ends to make them spikes. It was so tempting to make this a working portcullis, but this build is already so overly complicated, I made the difficult decision not to have any moving pieces in this build. So to commit to this, I glued the portcullis in place in between those two pieces of foam. Having this gap in between makes it look like the portcullis could go up and down, even though it can't. But it's good for immersion. With the face sculpted and the gate glued together, I could no longer avoid the thing that I have been avoiding, which is setting up the printer that Bamboo Labs sent me months ago. Bamboo Labs sent me the A1, which is an FDM printer. In general, FDM printers are really safe to use if you've got decent ventilation, but in my studio, I have zero ventilation, so I didn't really feel safe setting it up in here. But spring has sprung and it is finally warm enough to set the printer up in my shed like I had planned. To be honest, I was pretty nervous about this because I am low-key dumb and super bad with technology, and I've heard so many horror stories from crafters with their failed prints and all the things that they have to do to get their printers to work. But I'm a big brave boy and I want to print stuff, so I cleaned up the shed and started setting up the printer. It was pretty easy to set up, but it was a little scary. At one point, the instructions tell you to flip the printer upside down and hang it over a table, and that absolutely freaked me out. But all in all, it took me about an hour to set up, and it really wasn't that hard. Once it was set up, I set the printer to print the classic boat, and I was amazed by just how fast it moved. I've watched so many crafters use 3D printers that I kind of got desensitized to the fact that this technology is crazy. This is fully a robot. A robot that will most certainly not try and kill me, right? Right? The boat turned out great, but then it was time to do the part that I was actually afraid of, which was learning how to use the programs. Like I said, I'm super bad with technology, so I asked my friend Aaron, Summon Lesser Maker, for some help. He told me to stop overthinking and just try to figure it out on my own. He was a lot nicer about it than that, but that was the gist. And he was right, it really wasn't that hard. The first thing I wanted to print was the top of the two turrets that flank either side of the gate. This is the kind of fiddly detail that will take me a really long time to craft and end up looking just okay. I learned this from my Tower Giant build. It took me a little while to figure out, but eventually I found a model I liked, I cut the top off, I rescaled it to the size I wanted, and then I set it to print. And to my surprise, it totally worked. It was a bit smaller than I was expecting, but putting it on, I actually liked the silhouette a bit more. Having a smaller turret top made this slope a bit more dramatic, and I think created a much more whimsical shape. So I printed a second one and glued them both in place. I know some people have thoughts on 3D printing, but ultimately it's just a tool like any other. To me, 3D printing is never going to replace making things by hand because That's the whole point. I love making things, but what 3D printing can do is print the parts that I don't want to make so I can spend more time making the things I do want to make. One of the things I'm really excited to try is printing armatures that I can then sculpt on top of. This would save me a lot of time and help with things like dynamic posing, which is a thing that I'm not very good at. I have a little bit more experimenting to do to see what kind of models and what kind of details work on an FDM printer, but I'm having a great time playing around with it. If you have models that you think would be useful for this project, or ideas about how I could utilize this printer for this project, please let me know. And shout out to Bamboo Labs for sending me this printer. Also, big shout out to Kira from Bamboo Labs, who's been so good to work with and so patient with me as I took forever to set this thing up. Also, if you're interested in getting yourself a printer, I do have an affiliate link in the description down below. I get a little kickback at no extra cost to you, so win-win. Alright, back to the video. Off camera, I made a few additions to the outer walls I made in my last video, and I attached them to the gate. After gluing it all together, it kind of dawned on me just how heavy this castle is going to be. So I decided I was going to make it so that the castle could be broken down into smaller pieces. I didn't really give it much thought when I put it all together, but this will be absolutely necessary if I ever want to transport this thing. I've got some really strong magnets that the Magnet Baron sent me a long time ago, and I think I'll use those to assemble the whole thing later, but that's a problem for future niche. Right now, I gotta figure out how to texture this thing. I bought a few new materials for this project that I decided to test before throwing them onto the actual build. The first is puffy paint. I've seen Mechanical Fiend use this a lot, and I thought it would be really helpful if I wanted to sculpt vines onto this thing later. When making the base for my Griffin Troll, I sculpted a bunch of vines by hand. I think using puffy paint would give a similar effect and take so much less time. I tested out a few different consistencies of plaster of Paris, as well as 2 different air dry clays. The first clay I have is called Plus. It is a natural air dry clay, and I bought a 10-pound block of it when I was sculpting a real life-size gargoyle last year for an art installation I was doing. The clay was an absolute dream to work with. It was so creamy smooth, but it cracked so bad. I could not get this thing to stop cracking. It actually took almost as long to fix the cracks as it did to sculpt the entire thing in the first place. The thing that ended up working best was fixing the cracks and then slathering the whole thing in Mod Podge. For this project, which is an ancient evil castle, I think some cracking might actually look kind of good. Knowing that, this clay will be used situationally though. The second clay I got is called Sculpt Dry. As far as I can tell, it's just a cheaper version of DOS clay, but it's really nice to work with. It is super smooth, it took detail super well, it adhered to the cardboard, which is nice, and it only cracked a tiny bit. I will be using this clay a lot going forward. Since I made the tower out of so many different materials, it was pretty lumpy bumpy, so I decided to try and smooth it all out with a big thick coat of plaster of Paris. This didn't really work the way I intended, but it did create a texture that I kind of liked. Once it dried, I sanded and sculpted the plaster to make all these drippy areas look a bit more intentional. Then I added some clay on top of the plaster to add some more goopy swirls. Turns out the Sculpt Dry doesn't stick to the plaster super well, so I had to mix it with some white glue to get it to stick, which kind of worked. I went back and forth between liking and hating this texture, but what really struck me was that the wall next to it looked so plain by comparison. I knew I didn't want to glue individual bricks for this project, but I thought it might look cool if there were sections where the wall chipped away, showing some exposed brick underneath. To achieve this, I carved away the plaster, filled that area with some more Sculpt Dry, and then stuck in some cork bricks. I absolutely loved the way this looked, and it definitely helped add some more interest to the wall. With all these different materials, I wasn't sure if all these parts were working as a whole. As funny as I think it would be to go 3 videos without priming anything, I just have to see what this thing looks like. A lot of my spray cans are pretty old and crusty, so I decided to try and clean out the nozzle by sticking a metal tool into it and... This is a PSA. Don't do this. Also, this is why protective eyewear exists, because that could have been in my eyes. So stupid. After cleaning my face and my hair and my glasses, I wasn't really satisfied with the final result, so I decided to resculpt some areas with some Milliput. And that's why this video is late. Sorry! But with everything base coated and textured, I think I like it. I want to know what all of you think though. Does this work? Should this be the look and texture for the rest of the castle? I definitely think it's close, and I really do like it. It's a good sign that every time I get a free second, I start sculpting little details onto the wall. This is how I know when a project has legs, when I'm constantly craving working on it. And for context, this is what the wall will look like with the rest of the castle. You can start to see the vision, can't you? So, what's next for the castle? Well, I got this idea for each section of the castle to be its own little encounter. Maybe there are trolls guarding every bridge. Maybe there are buffoonish goblin guards patrolling the walls. Maybe my wyvern built its nest on top of one of the towers. I also think it would be fun to have little rewards scattered throughout the castle. Maybe if you go down into the cavern dungeons, a goblin will give you a skeleton key, or if you go to one of the other towers, the wizard's apprentice will give you a potion. I think having these loot box style encounters will make the whole map way more fun to explore. That's all for this one. Let me know what part of the castle you want me to make next. If you're excited about this project, then subscribe and maybe share this video with a friend. If you want to help support a real goblin artist make really stupid art, you can join me over on Patreon. My patrons are the reason I can keep making videos like this, and I truly cannot thank them enough. Look at them. They're beautiful. Truly, thank you so much for watching. It's Goblin Summer, baby. I'll see you next time. Bye!